All right. My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Dean Sandifer. It's June 27th, 2024. We're at Linfield University in McMinnville. Dean, thank you so much for joining us today. First question is, why wine?
Oh, that's a long story.
Good.
I got bit by the wine bug when I lived in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. I'm not sure how I got bit or how it bit me, but and it was a fascinating subject. As you know, there's a lot of information, a lot of history, et cetera, to wine, and so that made it interesting. So I decided I was going to make some at home. We don't have any wine grapes in Minnesota. Well, the University of Minnesota thinks that they do, but they don't. You know, they're all hybrids, and they don't make very good wine. But anyway, after that, so I made some wine, and I even found a small barrel to age it in, which was overly oaked. But anyway, I and several guys that I worked with decided to open a wine shop, which we did in downtown Minneapolis. And we had the wine shop for 2 or 3 years. It was a new area right near the Mississippi River, where they had some restaurants, and we put a wine shop in there, et cetera. Well, we barely made it. In fact, after 2 or 3 years, we decided we weren't making it, so we closed it up. But I kept on buying wine and things like that, and I got into buying Bordeaux's by the case, because I had a cousin who had a nice basement, a cool basement that I could store the Bordeaux in, which I did. I had 8 or 10 cases down there. But then how I got to Oregon, I was about 50 years old in 1995, and my job at Sperry Univac, which was a defense type job, we built a lot of computers for the Navy. The Berlin Wall came down, and all our contracts dried up, and I ended up getting laid off after 25 years. 60%, about 60% of the people in the building that I worked in, and there was a couple thousand people in there, about 60% of them got laid off over about a 1.5 year period. I had to lay off people that reported to me, and then I got laid off, and the person that laid me off, he got laid off, and it went on and on. So I said, well, you're 50 years old. You have a lot of computer experience. I'm a software engineer. And I said, and I really like Pinot Noir. I had spent some time in Europe with Sperry Univac as an on-site consultant, so I got to a lot of the vineyards in Germany and in France. Was to Burgundy 2 or 3 times, and I really like Pinot Noir. So I said, well, you're 50 years old, you're single now. I got divorced before that. And I said, and Oregon and New Zealand are supposed to be the areas that probably have the best environment to grow Pinot Noir. So I said, I'm going to go to Oregon and buy a vineyard or buy some land, which I did. But when I came out here, I needed a job too. So there was a company out here called Flight Dynamics, and They're still in Wilsonville. We used to be in Portland, but after I left the company, they moved to Wilsonville. But I was director of quality assurance there. We built a head-up guidance system. It's like a sun visor that goes into the cockpit where you bring it down, and then we displayed all the flight information in a holographic glass. It's called a head-up display. The pilot didn't have to go head down to see his instruments. He head up. He could keep his head up, see through the glass to the runway, and have all the flight information in the holographic glass. So we built that. And a lot of it went to Boeing. In fact, the new Dreamliner has two of them in every airplane, one for the pilot and for the co-pilot. So I was director of quality assurance there, and then I started looking for land. And there's not a lot of land available for sale that is good for growing fruit. But I found a small spot on the Eola Hills. It was a 5-acre plot, and it was a nice south-facing slope. It was 600 feet above sea level. It was all Nikaya soil, which went down about 2 or 3 feet, and then you hit basalt from the volcanoes and rocks. And so I planted that, and I used high-density planting. I had over 2,400 plants per acre, like they do in Burgundy. You know, Burgundy is meter by meter planting. I was 5.5 feet by a meter planting, so I was I had to have the rows a little bit wider. Couldn't get a tractor down them otherwise. So I picked four new clones, Dijon clones, 114, 115, 667, and 777, and I planted them on a couple of different rootstocks. I had one at 114 and 3309, about half of each. And so they were on 2 different rootstocks, and that was I planted in 96. And I had the first vintage in 98. And then I had my neighbors, had several neighbors who wanted to, they didn't have the money to plant the vineyards. So I planted it for them. So I ended up with about 10 or 12 acres right near my 5-acre parcel. So I ended up making about over 2,500 cases of wine. And I called the wine Domaine Coteau, Coteau, which means slope in French. And that went on until the Great Recession in 2008. So I was in the business about 14, 15 years. And I could sell all the wine. Most of the wine went out of state. One thing I did learn is that it takes a lot of marketing savvy and a lot of marketing money to sell wine. Just because you have a good product doesn't necessarily mean you can sell it. So I spent some time traveling, and I was in Texas several times. Got all the way down to Brownsville, matter of fact. That was interesting. A lot of border patrol driving around Brownsville, Texas. This is right on the border. And my brother lived in Austin. He had moved down there from 3M Company in St. Paul. So I've been into Texas at least 7 or 8 times. But so I went to Texas and New York and things like that, and Chicago, and so I got some traveling in. And so I was able to sell the wine, but it was not a struggle, but it took a lot of time. Then the recession hit, And all of a sudden, all my sales dried up. New York, you used to buy a couple pallets. Said, we're not taking them this year. So that's a lot of money. You got 56 cases on a pallet, and you got 2 pallets. That's a lot of money. Eventually, I went out of business. I didn't have deep pockets to ride that out. Some people have, of course, but a lot of smaller guys like myself, and there's others that all went out of business too with the recession. And the recession kind of hit, all of a sudden, boom, it was here. What the heck happened? You know? Thank you, George Bush. So I went out of business, and then I basically, that was when I was 65, something like that then, and so I retired, and still drink wine, but I can't afford $25 a bottle of wine every day. So there's some good wines coming out of Washington State, especially at good prices. You can get some nice Merlots and things like that for $8, $9, $10 a bottle. So I drink those. I drink Pinot too, of course. But when I had to close up, I had I don't know, 200 or 300 cases, which I stored, and over the next 4 or 5 years, I drank them. I drank all my Pinot. I would send the wine in for evaluation and at different competitions, and I did really quite well. And the ratings I got were normally 90, 91, 92. So the wine, it was very good wine. Well, part of it was I had a high density vineyard, and I would drop fruit so there was only one cluster per shoot. So I would get only about 2.5 tons per acre. And I had written, and I think that made sense. Pinot is one of those grapes that you can overcrop it, and so keeping the yield down worked well. Other than that, and the aging. I use French oak, of course, because that's the best oak for Pinot. And I would normally have 30 or 40% new oak each year. Did a lot of studying about that. You can get too much new oak on Pinot. And like some wineries here, they only have 5 or 10% on Pinot. Of new oak, but I found that 30 to 40% was a good ratio to give it. You get a little bit of oakiness in there, and so it worked out very well. And the market liked that. Now the wine was not cheap. It sold for $30, $32 a bottle. But I was able to sell it at that price. So that's about it.
So many questions to follow up on. Before we do that, I want to back up a little bit and talk about life before wine. Tell us where you're born and raised.
I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota. Went to Lakeland College in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Kind of like Linfield. It's a private school. It was linked into the United Church of Christ, so you had to take a couple of religious courses there to graduate. I don't know if Linfield's like that anymore.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Most private colleges are falling away from that. I played basketball there and put me through college. And after college, my first job was with Sperry Univac. They were building computers, and they had a big contract with the Navy to put computers in airplanes and track Russian submarines. And so there was about 8 or 10 of us that were hired in St. Paul, and we all moved to Johnsville, Pennsylvania, which is right outside of Philadelphia, to the Naval Air Development Center, NADC. That was the Navy's facility for putting stuff in airplanes. And there was a Lockheed that had P-3Cs, which was a 4-engine propeller-driven plane, and it was built so you can dump sonobuoys out of the plane into the water, where you can listen to and track Soviet submarines. So we built the software that went into that. Now those were the days where there wasn't much memory in computers. The computer that was built by Sperry Univac was a 30-bit computer. It had 32,000 words. I mean, and all the tracking and all the displays that went up inside the airplane, all that, it had to be done in 32,000 words of memory. And so it was a real tough to do that. But then the Sperry Univac came up when they were able to double the memory to 64K words. I say words instead of bytes. There was 3 bytes in a word. So I did that for 4 or 5 years, and then came back to St. Paul and worked in the software development area there. And then there was some new jobs in software quality assurance, which I got into. So I stopped development and started doing software quality work. That was all government work, and it was in the contract. Software quality assurance was a new discipline, and that was interesting. And so I learned a lot. And when I came out here, I was initially at Flight Dynamics. I was initially the software quality assurance guy, and then I got promoted to the director of quality assurance. So I did that in Minneapolis until, like I say, until the Great Wall came down in Berlin, and the Cold War was over, and then I came to Oregon.
Before coming here, what were your impressions of Oregon? Had you ever been here? What did you think about it?
Never had been here, but I had read quite a bit about the wine scene here, especially the Pinot Noir. And then compare that with California, which produces 100 times more wine than Oregon does. And I tasted a few of the wines would make it to Minneapolis, and there was a big wine shop in Minneapolis called Surdyk's, and so I knew the wine was good. And so, I came out here without ever seeing anything. Well, you're 50 years old, and I wanted to do something in life other than sit in Minneapolis or in St. Paul. So this was a good challenge.
Let's talk about the search for land first. Tell me about looking for land and about knowing when you'd found it.
I would drive around a lot to Salem, north of Salem, and around here, et cetera. Well, most of the land, as you know, here is farmland, and it's got soil depths of 4, 5, 6, 10, 15 feet on the Willamette Valley floor, and you can't grow grapes on that. It's too vigorous. You need to find. So the basic criteria, we need to find something up on a hillside where it has thinner soils. Hopefully something that tilted either east or south, preferably south, because this is a marginal climate, which is probably maybe not quite true anymore because of global warming. But 20, 25 years ago, it was sometimes a struggle to get the fruit right, which is again was my reason to go to one cluster pursuit, is that you can normally get that ripe. And the Burgundians used to say, still say, you have to have 13% natural alcohol in wine, without so the bricks needed to be 22.5 or something like somewhere in there. To get 13%. And a fairly easy way of doing that was one cluster pursuit, because you could ripen that, get that right. So, well, like I say, I found this parcel of land that was for sale. It was 600 feet above sea level, which is not too high. It was a nice south-facing slope. Which was very nice. Plus, it was Micaiah soil, so the soils were. It was an old pasture, really, and you should have seen the rocks in it. I spent many thousands of dollars getting the rocks taken out before you could plant anything. But it's a good site. When I went out of business, I sold it. Right now, the wine from that site sells for $125 a bottle in New York City. That's what I was told. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I was told. But it's a good site. It produces good wine.
So you had no background in viticulture or planting a vineyard.
No.
So tell me about that. Tell me about learning.
Well, I read a lot of books from the University of California, Davis. Read a lot of books, and I hired a vineyard manager to plant the vineyard and take care of it. His name was Luis. He was the vineyard manager at Sokol Blosser. Probably still is. I haven't seen him for a few years. And I can't plant 10,000 vines myself. Dig the hole and plant 10,000 vines. So, he did that. He laid out the vineyard, dug the holes, planted the vine. Now I got the vines. They were potted plants from California. I bought them a year before, and they grafted them, and that worked out real well. It worked out well.
How did you choose the clones and the broodstock?
I talked to a lot of people in Napa. There was a guy in Napa that I went down and saw several times that was bringing Dijon clones in. And I'm not sure if he was doing that legally or illegal. I think it was legal because he was working with a nursery there. And his view at that point was that 114, 115, 667, and 777 were probably the best clones. So that's what I planted. Now I notice lately that the 777 clone is really number one, one of the number one clones now. And if I had my vineyard, I would probably graft over my 114s to 777s. But at the time, that's what they thought was best, and so that's what I planted.
You talked about the high density planting. Why did you decide to go that way?
Because I had read that, especially in Burgundy, the high density plantings made a better wine. And I looked at some of the spacing here of 10, 12 feet between rows and plants that hung 20 clusters per vine. And I think, holy crap, how can you, especially after reading all this stuff in France and Burgundy, how the hell can you make a wine with that many clusters and that spacing, et cetera? So I couldn't go meter by meter like they do in Bordeaux and in Burgundy, but I found a Kubota tractor that was 9,000 series or something like that. That was only 5 feet wide, and so that's what I bought. So that was 5 feet. So I made my spacing between rows 5.5 feet, so you could get down it, but just barely. But that worked well. And the vineyard crew that Luis had did a really good job of maintaining the vineyard and dropping the fruit down to one cluster per shoot. So that worked out well.
Was your plan initially to make wine as well?
Yes. Yes.
Tell me about learning that process.
Well, I read a lot of books. And I had made wine in Twin Cities a little bit. So I knew the chemistry. I'm not a chemistry major, I'm a mathematics major. But you can pick that stuff up from the books. The University of California, Davis had some good fermentation textbooks and things like that. So I learned by book learning, not by hands-on experience. In retrospect, it would have been nice for me to take a couple courses at UC Davis in fermentation sciences. Because after a couple of years, I never had a problem with fermentation and things like that, but after some years, I thought to myself, what the heck am I going to do if I get a stuck fermentation? I'm not sure I know what to do with that. But I had some good friends. Gino Cuneo at Cuneo Cellars and things like that was kind of near me. He had some other yeasts that would go up to 16-17% alcohol. So I never had to use. I never had a stuck fermentation, but he did once, and that worked for him. So, but it would have been, in retrospect, looking back. Here you are, a guy that knows nothing about fermentation, making wine. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of us that do that. There's not everyone gets a fermentation science degree at UC Davis or Oregon State University too. But that worked out okay. I kept the temperatures right and punched down a couple times a day, and and so it worked out well. And it's just pretty standard. In a sense, fermentation is not magic. It's fairly simple if you have the temperatures right, et cetera. And so. But like I say, looking back, I said, "Jesus, Dean, if you would have ruined the vinnies, you're talking tens of thousands of dollars. It didn't happen." Yeah.
What were the biggest challenges going from being a home winemaker to winemaking at that scale?
Other than bringing the fruit in, destemming it, and all that. That's a lot of work. In Minnesota, we'd get a couple hundred pounds of grapes, big deal. Here you're looking at tons of grapes. The scale, just the scale was not enormous, but it was very large for me. I'd hire a couple people to help me with the destemming and sorting and things like that. We always sorted the fruit, of course, and as most people do. But there's some that don't. They just dump it all in and go the way it goes. But I sorted the fruit, and you threw out some clusters that just weren't ripe, or sometimes you could find something that looked like it had a little mildew on it. Get rid of those because the spray program, sometimes the cluster wasn't sprayed all the way, and you might have a little mildew. Didn't have much year after year. Fruit was pretty clean, but other just the size.
You talked earlier about selling wine and being a challenge. Tell me about your method for selling wine and how you had success.
Well, with the 3-tier system here in the United States, you have to sell to a wholesaler. So I would call a wholesaler and introduce myself and see if they wanted me to send them a bottle of wine, which most of them said yes. Some of them said no, we're not interested. But so I'd send them a bottle of wine, and then I'd follow up after that to see if they're interested in buying. And some of them were, some of them weren't. And a lot of it has to do, when you look at it from the wholesaler's perspective, they have a set of labels that they're selling, and bringing another label in may upset some other wineries because now they're competing, et cetera, et cetera. So most of the time they would say yes, but they wouldn't order a lot. I mean, they're not buying a pallet of wine. Other than a few of them in New York did, in Chicago. But that was basically, I spent a lot of time on the phone. Marketing, selling, plus then I got a website up with my awards and things like that. Now that helped. When you can say, well, the wine inspector gave it a 90, or the wine enthusiast said wine 92, whatever. That helps, and then any advertisement from that in the news, in their paper, whatever, I could get on the website. I had a guy that would do that. So I built a website that had a lot of information, tastings and ratings and things like that. And over time, that really did help. I remember one of my first wines I sent into the competition was in California. I remember what it was. It was in Southern California. Anyway, it was a big competition. And I didn't hear anything from them. I knew that they had the so I remember calling the number, and I remember the guy saying, "Oh, you're Domaine Coteau." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you're going to like this." I said, "Why?" He said, "You were chosen the best of class." That's great. So that went on the website, of course, and things like that. So I still remember that. To me, that was a big deal. Pinot was the best of class in their competition. But there was just a lot of time on the phone. And like I say, then I took some time and traveled to some places into Chicago and went to New York several times. But you have to have in retrospect, if you have a lot of wine to sell, in retrospect, let's say New York, what you need a salesperson in New York. Now I didn't know this at the time, but there are salespeople in New York, in Boston, I assume other Washington D.C. On the East Coast, that maybe represent 5, 10, 15 different wineries. And they have their own little business like that. And if I would have known that at the time, I would probably have searched out and hopefully found someone to do that. But at the time, I didn't know that. Didn't know that.
What were your initial impressions of Oregon and of the wine industry here?
Small scale, homey, friendly, and everyone helping each other. And I think that has probably remained true. But it's not like Napa Valley when you have thousands and thousands of acres there. We don't have large vineyards here. Well, geographically, it's not tenable. So there's a lot of small vineyards, and there's a lot of small labels. There's very few wineries that make 100,000 cases of wine. Yeah, the friendliness and the openness and the assistance and ideas, etc., all I think are pretty much Oregonian and not necessarily Californian. I'm not sure California does that. They're too competitive and too big down there, too much money, I think, to help each other out. But Oregon was, I don't know what Washington State is like. I don't know if they have the attitude that we do here or not. So,
tell me about the growth you saw in Oregon while you were in the industry.
Well, the only growth I really saw was in the statistics for vineyard that the government collected each year, and you would notice each year that the number of acres of vineyards was increasing. And I don't remember what the percentages were. It wasn't a huge increase, but every year there was more. Maybe, I don't know, 2, 3, 4% more, something like. I'm not sure what that was, but so you kind of knew that things were growing, which implied that the Oregon wine people were able to sell it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be planting, So I guess during my experience with vineyard sizes and things like that, the industry was growing. It wasn't huge growth, but it was pretty standard growth year by year. It wasn't like you're up 10% and then nothing. It was 3, 4, just a slow movement upwards. That was my impression.
What about more specifically in your neighborhood in the Eola Amity Hills? What did you notice from neighbors and growth in that region?
Well, like I say, I planted some of my neighbors' vineyards. There wasn't where I was on Amity's Hill there, Three Trees Lane. There wasn't a lot of new vineyards. There was one new vineyard that was planted, but it was small. I don't know, 2, 3, 4 acres. But other than that, there was a 15-acre vineyard near mine that is owned by a guy in New York City. He's in the book business. But I think he sold it to Erath, I think. And it's a Pinot Noir vineyard, although I think they grafted some of it over to Pinot Gris. But other than that, there wasn't a lot of, around my vineyard, let's say a couple miles, there wasn't a lot of expansion. I'm not sure where the expansion was coming from, but well, near me there was I forget the name of it. It was vineyard. They had must have been 50, 60 acres. It was CalPERS that financed some of it, and Erath just bought that I think 3 or 4 years ago because they went bank. It was partly financed by CalPERS. But the company that was doing all this, and they were planting a lot of vineyards. They went bankrupt, I think, but they were near me. But they spent a lot of money. There was a large south-facing and eastern-facing slope, and it must have been 60, 70 acres. But it was like my vineyards, it was full of rocks. They spent tons of money in labor, et cetera, to roads to make that into a vineyard. And I thought, watching them do that, I said, boy, oh boy, that fruit's got to be expensive because you're spending a whole lot of money. And they had a vineyard consultant that was on the property. I mean, typical California thinking, I think. Lots of money and you just throw it, it didn't work for them, not here.
I'm curious about obviously you planted as Oregon was sort of coming onto the map nationally and internationally. I'm curious about the response as you traveled to Oregon wine, to Pinot Noir, Willamette Valley, those kinds of things. Did you notice an uptick in recognition and appreciation of wine from here? Not a lot that I can say. Partly because the amount of wine leaving the state is pretty small when you compare it, let's say, with California, for example, or Washington State. There's a lot of wines coming out of Washington State. Columbia Crest, I think, produces 500,000 cases of wine or something like that. Relatively speaking, comparing Oregon wines with, let's say, with California and Washington State, we're small, and a lot of the wine didn't make it out of the state. But even the wine that did, I mean, people in Minneapolis, they had choices, maybe 2 or 3 Pinots, and that was it. Well, that was 15, 20 years ago. I'm not sure what it's like now in Minneapolis. But we're just not that big. So I'm curious about your impressions of Oregon wine since you left the industry. How close of attention do you pay, and what have you noticed?
Well, I get the monthly magazines, things like that at Fred Meyer's or something like that, or the wine shops. So I pay attention, but not as much as I used to. Like they had an article a couple months ago about a new person who started the vineyard, and I read a little bit of it. And said, yeah, I know, I know this story. So I don't read it all. I pay attention, but I've lost track of some of the things that are going on.
I'm curious about what you've been up to since leaving wine. Any exciting adventures in retirement?
Not a whole lot. I wrote a book, which I spent 10 years writing.
Tell us about that.
Well, it's called The Crucifixion Eve Era, and it's not religious, it's a history. Of course, there's some religion in it because it's a historical period from about 63 BC until about 73 AD, which involves the early development of Christianity. But it also has got Caesar and Octavian and the Roman Empire and its fall into an empire, from a republic into an empire. And basically, I wrote it for my grandkids. I started out pretty small. Well, I said, they don't know a whole lot about religion, about the development of Christianity, or the development of Judaism, for that matter. So I'll write a few pages and give them. So that's how it started. And then said, well, I put that in. I might as well put this in. Well, I put that in. I might as well talk about Herod the Great. And it went on from there. Now it's 500 pages. And I've published it. It's been published. It's available on Amazon, but it's not cheap. It's all in color. I got several hundred pictures in there. I use, like Joseph Campbell, I use art as a communication and so there's a lot of pictures in there. Oh, and there's a lot of maps in there, and maps of different portions of Palestine and things like that. But again, it's not religion. It's a history, but it includes obviously the early development of Christianity, and so I talk a little bit about the Romans and the crucifixions and things like that, and how they did it from a historical perspective. So I've done that. In fact, I just added some appendices to it. I wrote an appendix on the Vestal Virgins in Rome. I wrote an appendix on the development of the idea of the soul. What else did I put in there? I wrote an appendix about the power of culture and how culture determines a lot of things. So anyway, it's called the Crucifixion Eve Era. So it's about a 100-year period, 100 years in duration, before and until the destruction of the second temple in Jerusalem. So that's what I've been doing. So I spent a lot of time, I've done a lot of research, hopefully coming up with some good stories and some good history in there to make it interesting. And so that's been keeping me out of trouble for the last number of years.
That's fascinating. I love it. Last question for you. Tell me about biggest accomplishment or proudest achievement. As you look back, what makes you happiest or proudest?
Well, I think I have to say coming out here and planting the vineyard was something that, I did from scratch, and not knowing a lot about how to do a lot of this stuff agriculturally. I'm not an agricultural guy. I'm like Dick Erath, I guess. I'm a technical guy. And so being able to put that all together and be successful at it it's kind of a feather in your cap. Kind of a feather in your cap. I guess that I would say that's I also have to say that's where I've had the most enjoyment too. It's being able to accomplish something like that and be successful at it. It gives you a feeling of a real accomplishment. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. All the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have, or anything we didn't cover today that you'd like to talk about?
No, I think I think you've done a good job.
All of your many varied careers. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your story with us. We'll go ahead and let you off the hook. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.